And now it's time for Rockin Company's Rockin CU. We'll take a look, catch up with football recruiting, and Adam Munsterteiger's big reason to look ahead with optimism to future Buff football teams. It's brought to you by Rockin Company, making Colorado beautiful with natural stone construction. 5 decades, 2 generations, rockinco.com. And we welcome in the publisher of BuffStampede.com. Must reading, especially if you love the recruiting game. You can follow Adam Munsterteiger at AdamCM777. And good afternoon, Adam.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Adam, I want to say something real quick. How does it feel to be in a drama-free environment up there right now? Because in Fort Collins, it's just a mess. So it's drama-free in Boulder. Does it feel good?
Yeah, I mean, there's some pressure certainly on Mike McIntyre and the staff to perform this season. So it's not like there isn't any pressure on them this year. But yeah, I mean, and we went through that, covering CU last year with the whole Joe Tumpkin saga. So we're not too far removed from a little drama in Boulder, but it's definitely been a little bit nice, especially with recruiting this cycle. It's going to be interesting. Now they're allowing official visits from April to June. So being able to kind of focus more on that stuff instead of, like you said, the drama is nice this spring.
Although drama is good copy. So it's interesting to hear a reporter, writer, editor, essayist, columnist say, no drama. It's nice up there in Boulder right now. But I understand it because you specialize in the stuff that nobody else really takes on, especially not at your level. And that's the recruiting. And something I've thought, and I think you've echoed this, I can't remember Colorado being in on more 4-star recruits than they have been this spring looking forward.
Yeah, it's quite a long list. They had 6 top priority recruits on their campus for the spring showcase. They had Brew McCoy. He's the nation's #1 ranked athlete prospect. He's a 5-star guy,
Wow.
#2 prospect in California on campus for the spring game. And they had 4-star tight end Braden Liebrock on campus for an unofficial recently. He plans to return on an official visit. Yeah. So yeah, these guys, they've definitely upped to the level of kids they're bringing on campus. Now, does that really matter at the end of the day if you can't get them on board? So, I mean, it's great that they've gotten visits from these guys, and there are quite a few other ones. Tariq Luckett, Braden Huffman Dixon, they're both 4-star receivers from California that plan to take an official visit to CU this summer. You've got SoCal cornerback KJ Trujillo. He's a top 100 California recruit. He's going to actually take his first official out to CU the weekend of April 28th. And so, yeah, I could keep going down the list here, and there's names that keep popping up consistently. But again, you're going to at some point have to get some of these guys to start committing, and it's certainly no point to panic at this point with the recruiting process. They do already have 4 recruits when they got their quarterback locked up. Everybody's coming after, Ty Evans. So yeah, it looks really good. You got to sustain it, and then hey, you got to win some football games this season, even if you get some of these verbal commitments, because the signing period again this cycle is not going to start until at some point in December. So these guys can certainly change their mind if you don't have success on the field.
You can't sign 4-stars if you can't get their attention. We've
Right.
come a long way on this show, and when you're not competing with Drake or Appalachian State or even some Mountain West schools we won't mention, given the alumni sitting in the room here. But so that helps. How much of this, or is any, the fact that there's new recruiting rules, that spring visits are opened up, and there's a lot freer environment for recruits to take official visits?
I think that's a little part of it. I think some getting a little bit of new life on your recruiting staff too, with some new assistant coaches. Ashley Ambrose is somebody that actually was a good recruiter. His first stint in Boulder, he's back. Especially with those defensive backs, it really helps what you've been able to do in terms of producing NFL talent there. Isaiah Oliver is going to be your 4th defensive back drafted in the last 2 years. If you're a cornerback, you look at what Mike McIntyre and his staff have done with those guys, developing them at CU. That's got to be an attractive option for you. So that helps. Quan Drake, the big pressure is going to be on him because we've talked countless times on your show, just the biggest glaring weakness with this staff's recruiting has been on the defensive line. And one of the big reasons why they brought Quan Drake in is because he's a younger guy that has a lot of energy. He's got ties out to New Orleans, so it'll be interesting to see if they can maybe pull a couple guys, defensive linemen from the South. So I think that's part of it. It probably helps Colorado, especially if you talk about bringing kids out in June on an official visit. Let's say you're battling Arizona and Arizona State, and they spend the weekend before or the weekend after in Tempe or Tucson, and it's 105, 110 degrees. And Boulder, obviously the weather in June is pretty spectacular. You do lose a little bit by bringing kids out in June, just from the standpoint that it's not a full campus in terms of students, with it being summer break, but that's something that other colleges are going to have a challenge of dealing with too. So I do think generally the early official visits does benefit Colorado.
And the other thing, we'll talk about the success with defensive backs. This is becoming wide receiver U as well. Maybe not the national reputation, but Darren Chiaverini bringing in quality receivers by the score. I often say in this show that they lose 3 terrific receivers, and they will not lose any production. They may even be better next year in the passing game. Changing gears, something you said to me off the air about why you are really optimistic. If you're going to be optimistic, there is a reason to be optimistic after this last season about the future up there in Boulder.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm still not sure about this 2018 CU team just because of, again, in the trenches. Now, it does sound like they developed some guys on the offensive line to where maybe that position won't be as big a weakness as we thought it was going to be a month and a half ago, but still the D-line, I don't know, and that's the reason they didn't go to a bowl game last year. But you look at it long term, and you got to feel really good just based off what they pulled in with their 2017 recruiting class. It kind of reminds me almost of that 2013 class that they had, McIntyre's first recruiting class. Guys like Philip Lindsay, Sefo Lufau, Chidobe Owuze, Tedrick Thompson. They had Jimmy Gilbert was in that group, Bryce Bobo. There was just a long list of guys in that class that they went through a lot of adversity, and they came out on the other side, and they accomplished what they accomplished with that 10-win season in 2016. I feel like this recruiting class of 2017 is going to eventually be a group that reaches some of those similar heights. You saw a lot of those guys play as true freshmen last year. Laviska Chenault, Katie Nixon, Jared Poplowski before he suffered the knee injury, Nate Landman, bright future at linebacker, Dante Sparaco, Jacob Collier as a pass rusher. There's a bunch of guys. You saw a little bit of a taste of what they could do last year. And then this spring, it was really the guys in that class that had redshirted that really started to make big jumps up the depth chart. Chris Miller is a super athletic cornerback. He's got a 41-inch vertical, and he's gotten a little bit more physical since arriving. That was kind of the reason that they redshirted him, just because he was getting bullied a little bit in camp last year. But in those 3 open practices, he made big strides in that. Alex Fontenot might not be their feature back this year with Trayvon McMillan transferring in, but he sure looked like a feature back this spring. He's got a really good, impressive speed. Carson Wells is a name to remember, too. Outside linebacker, he was running with the first-team defense in those open practices. You saw him bait Steven Montez into an interception in the spring showcase, and he just seems like a real natural playmaker. You could just keep going down the list of that recruiting class. We've talked about Jacob Moretti a bunch of times on your show. He's probably their future left tackle as long as he stays healthy. Terrence Lang was in that class. He's their most physically gifted defensive lineman. Tyler Lytle was in that class. He's going to be pushing for the backup quarterback job this year. Who else? Will Sherman was in that group. He's one of their best young offensive linemen. He might be a starter this year. And you just talk about
on and on. It is remarkable.
It's incredible that class that they brought in.
The participation they had in the last couple of minutes here. I want to change gears with you and talk a little bit what's happening for Tad Boyle. He's got a great young core coming back next year, but they probably need some reinforcement.
Yes, they have that one open scholarship right now with Torrey Miller-Stewart planning to be a grad transfer. They had a 7-foot Serbian named, and I hope I don't butcher his name, Novak Topolovic. I definitely butchered it. He's going to be a grad transfer from Idaho State. Keep an eye on that. But Tad Boyle also met with a junior college guard named Shane Gatling. He was his league's MVP last season, set the school record with 3-pointers in a season last year, so he's figuring out his April visits. And he also met with a 5-star point guard recruit, Brandon Williams, who decommitted from Arizona following that ESPN report on Sean Miller. I'm not quite sure they're quite in the mix for him yet, but they're kind of gauging his interest. So they're looking at both guard and big options with that open scholarship.
Well, if they do bring in a point guard of the quality of a Brandon Williams, they certainly need help on the wing. I could imagine them playing 2 guys who can handle the ball and pass together, and that gives them depth that they don't have currently at the point guard position. Mark, have you got any questions for Adam in our last minute?
I'll just say, Adam, tomorrow is Easter and April Fool's Day. You know when the last time that happened? They were on the same day.
When is that?
1954.
Oh,
okay.
Last time. So I don't know if you had anything special planned for Michael on April Fool's Day, Easter.
It's probably one of the years Ohio State won the national title.
Probably.
I remember the Indians breaking the record for wins in the in baseball and then getting swept by the Giants and Willie Mays in '54.
I'm just happy for you, Adam. You get a little break this spring. You don't have to deal with a lot of drama and nonsense.
Well, tell us what's coming
Kelly
up.
Lyle's overwhelmed right now. So
in our last half minute, what's coming up on BuffStampede.com?
Well, speaking of basketball recruiting, the CU is very pleased with how both of their early signings, Dalen Kuntz and Elijah Parquet, played as seniors. So we're going to have features coming up on both of them.
All right. Terrific. Adam, we'll talk more on these subjects next week. Thank you.
Perfect.
See you, Adam.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks.
Rockin Company's Rockin CU. Adam Munsterteiger, BuffStampede.com.